What would happen if Izuku Midoriya received One for All early from All Might? How would this impact the events of My Hero Academia? That is the very question I'm going to be asking myself today. So now, let's begin. Everything in Izuku's life would remain mostly the same until he turned the age of 10. All the bullying that would come with Izuku being told he was quirkless would follow after he would turn 4. So for 6 long, grueling years, Izuku was tortured endlessly by Bakugo and his gang of bullies. However, everything like that would end up changing when Izuku would turn 10, as the only way I see Izuku getting One for All early is if the sludge villain event were to be just jump forward 5 years in advance. So as Izuku is 10 in most likely 5th grade, as the sludge villain event would occur, Izuku would be walking outside of school and would end up being under just sort of a bridge as the sludge villain would end up capturing him. Izuku would go much easier without a fight, mostly because he's 5 years younger than what he was in canon My Hero Academia. So All Might would end up popping out and seeing the unconscious boy having sludge go down throughout his body. So All Might would jump in, punching the sludge villain away, collecting it into a 2-liter soda bottle, before smacking Izuku on the head as he would look worriedly towards his phone about to call 911. However, Izuku would end up bursting up, gasping for air, coughing out some of the sludge that was still left over inside of his throat, as would then look on towards All Might before he would jump up and gasp, What? You are All Might, the number one hero! It's an honor to meet you. Can you sign my notebook?" Izuku would say, stuttering, just in complete disbelief that he had met such a high-powered individual like All Might, being the number one hero after all. He was his idol, and he wanted to be so much like All Might. It was insane. He never thought he'd meet him in person. So as Izuku would reach towards his notebook, All Might would then pull it out of nowhere before just giving it back to Izuku, with All Might's signature written across 2 pages. Izuku would thank All Might before going to ask him a question, as All Might would go to jump off. Izuku, of course, would instinctively go and grab onto his leg, as All Might would jump off before noticing Izuku hanging on. All Might would be worried for the young child before landing on top of a building. All Might wouldn't scold Izuku as much as he would have in canon, because Izuku was still a child and probably just didn't want All Might to go so fast. "Young man, you could have gotten injured like that." "Yeah, I know, I just had an important question to ask you." "Okay, what is it?" All Might would ask questioningly. "Well, can a quirkless person become a hero?" Izuku would say, twiddling with his fingers in anticipation, hoping to hear the words that no one had uttered to him, that you can still be a hero, you just have to have hope. But All Might would look down towards Izuku in sadness. "I'm sorry, kid. I'd suggest taking another career path if you want to save people. As a hero, business is a very risky job, and we heroes risk our lives every single day against people with very strong quirks and capabilities. I just can't see someone who's quirkless becoming a hero anytime soon. I'm sorry if this shatters any of the hopes you had. I'm sorry if this shatters the image that you once had for me. I just try to do what's best for the people and tell people what's best for them, even though it may not be too good of news," All Might would say before opening the door, walking down the stairwell down to the 1st floor, as Izuku never would have seen All Might in his skeleton form, as this event being just jump forward 5 years, is All Might would still be injured. However, he's only injured by 2 years, so with slow regression over time, it's actually not as bad as it was in canon My Hero Academia. It's a lot better than what it actually was in canon. So All Might would get out of there right as he would puff into Skeleton Might, as he would hurriedly down the stairs before making it to a point where Izuku, who had started walking down the stairs himself, wouldn't notice him, as All Might would be walking down in his skeleton form before walking off, as All Might didn't have any of the capabilities or limits that his power once did. So as Izuku was walking off, he would end up seeing an explosion from down just the road that he was walking on, as it was completely barren. Izuku would rush over there as no one was around, as the sludge villain been exploded out of the bottle that All Might had, as Izuku stared motionlessly at the sludge villain who was escaping, suffocating the young boy inside. As Izuku would look on, trying to realize who the person was inside, as he would then realize who it was. It was his tormentor, his bully, Bakugo Katsuki. Izuku immediately would jump into action, not caring about his life, wanting to only save others. He didn't care what Bakugo had done to him for all those years. He just wanted to save a life, and prove to himself even that he could still be a hero. As he would jump in, throwing his backpack at the sludge villain, as one of his pencils would stab into the sludge villain's eyes as he would scream out in pain. As Izuku would rush in, trying to peel back some of the sludge from the sludge villain, as Bakugo would try to yell and force himself to make Izuku get out of there, but it wouldn't work. Finally, a crowd would end up drawing, as All Might would end up jumping in to save the day, having rounded the corner to see Izuku rushing in to fight, as he would just stare in shock. The young quirkless boy that had just asked him if he could become a hero was now jumping in action, trying to save another young person. As All Might would jump in, and now in his full form before anyone had even he would jump in, pulling Izuku back, saving him before grabbing Bakugo by his arm, pulling him out as well, before smashing the sludge villain into oblivion, collecting him up back to a different soda can that he had found on his way. As All Might would end up see Bakugo walk off, before Bakugo would say, "I didn't need saving, you stupid Deku." However, Izuku wouldn't care, only just staring on in complete shock at his hands. He couldn't believe what he had just done. He had just ran on towards them without even thinking. As the crowd would disperse, having seen All Might already save the day, All Might would still be sitting there looking down at Izuku. That was very dangerous, young man. But it was very admirable. I can't say that when I was your age I would have jumped in to save someone that was my age, risking my own life. But I do have a question for you. Were your legs moving on your own? Izuku would nod his head before explaining that he just didn't understand what he was doing. He just couldn't let his classmate die like that. So All Might would then think, well, son, maybe you can be a hero even though you're quirkless. I actually have something to tell you. As All Might would then walk Izuku off towards the beach, as he would then make it to the desolate beach surrounded by trash. Well, things may not be as appeared, as All Might would then puff into a skeleton form, as Izuku would look on in shock. Wait, you're not All Might, you're an imposter. All Might would shake his hands hurriedly before lifting up his shirt, showing Izuku his injury. Look, son, I got this injury a while back from fighting a villain. Not even the number one hero, All Might, is just untouchable. So anyways, I believe you can be a hero. You just have to work for it. As I need to tell you something. I too was quirkless. But how did you get a quirk? Izuku would butt into All Might's conversation. Well, actually, I was given this power by my mentor. Her name was Nana Shimura, and she gave me this power called One for All. This power was basically sole purpose was to defeat another quirk user called All for One, a quirk based on pure evil. And so, I deem you worthy of being my successor. I deem you worthy that you truly can become a hero, the number one hero, in fact. And I believe one day you will be able to take down All for One once and for all. Izuku would his head towards All Might, just having a huge explosion of knowledge and waves coming in and out of his brain. Izuku just couldn't comprehend it, as he would then sit back onto some of the garbage, holding his head in complete shock. Yes, I know it's quite hard to understand. But if you wish to become my successor and gain my power, it's going to take a long, grueling cycle of training. So, if you're up to it, I suggest we get started. Every day after school, I would suggest coming here and training with me. We are going to be cleaning this beach out, as it was once a beautiful, lively beach with hundreds of people surrounding it, but now it's just a dumpster of what it used to be, just filled to the brim with trash. It's a complete wasteland. So I wish we should fix it, just to do a good deed. So why don't we get started now? As Izuku would nod his head, as he would start to move and lift some of the garbage just around, as All Might would end up paying for some dumpsters to be moved over towards the beach, as many of the people who would be paying or would just see a small child lifting up small pieces of trash, walking up a stepping stool, and then just dumping it into the dumpster. They were in complete shock and would ask Izuku what he was doing before he would just shrug his shoulders and say, "Oh, I'm training to do something." Many of them would just nod just awkwardly as this would continue going on. As Izuku would end up going home for the night, he would bid All Might farewell, as he would then walk into the dark just house, as he would end up being complete chills would go down his spine. He knew something was wrong. As he would flick on the lights, there stood Inko with a wooden spoon in hand, as she would smack it down onto her other hand, as she would then run towards Izuku before yelling where he had been all day. As Izuku would jump back, shaking his hands, saying, "Oh, I was just training. I was training to do something. I just wanted to train and get stronger, so I can defend myself against the bullies like Bakugo." Inko would nod her head, just glaring at Izuku before saying, "Okay, if you're going to train then, I suggest you get back every day before 9 p.m. sharp. If you're not going to get any dinner. You're going to have to prepare dinner yourself now. I already made it, but I just happened to throw it out as it got cold. Since you were so late, why don't you start to prepare it, unless you don't want dinner today?" Izuku would nod his head, just sad having to make dinner himself, hoping that there was still some leftovers. He didn't buy that Inko had just thrown out all of the food, as she wasn't the wasteful type. Izuku knew his mother could be harsh sometimes, but she was mostly nice to him, so he would give her a break for this. He didn't really want to have a confrontation with his own mother, after all. So every day he would get back by 9 p.m. sharp, and this would go on for 6 months of Izuku constant training, getting more and more muscle, as finally All Might would deem Izuku worthy of receiving his quirk. "Alright, Izuku, I've seen how much dedication you have to becoming the #1 hero and saving hundreds of people one day. So, here," All Might would pluck off a hair from his head before giving it down towards Izuku. "Eat this," All Might would say, as Izuku would look on in shock. "Eat what?" Izuku would say, so All Might would then just awkwardly laugh. "Yeah, it's kind of weird. I was in shock too. But the only way to get my power is to eat one of my hairs. It's quite strange of transportation method, I would say." Izuku would nod his head before eating it, as he would instantly say it felt stronger. All Might would say that's weird, as it should be digesting right now, but anyways, that doesn't matter. As 4 years would end up passing of Izuku constantly training his quirk. When Izuku had turned 13, All Might would end up introducing him to he would introduce him to one of his former mentors, as Izuku. All Might would bring Gran Torino to the beach one day, as Izuku would then be taught all sorts of styles and how to just control his body. And within these 5 years, Izuku would gain tons of just strength, as Izuku would end up having a control of around 30% of One for All by the time that the entrance exam is set to start. Now, right around a year into his training, Izuku would say that his mother's kind of getting suspicious about all of this training, and so All Might would just agree to finally meet Izuku's mother. This is about right after Izuku had received the quirk, and Izuku was still around 10 at this time. So All Might would go in and meet Inko, where they would and end up just talking about how All Might is training Izuku to become a great hero. However, All Might wouldn't end up being in his All Might form, rather being in his Skill Might form, as Ko and them would end up just becoming great friends, as All Might would end up bringing Izuku back to their house every single day. And finally, after a couple years, All Might would finally decide to reveal it to Inko instead of hiding it, well, after around a couple months rather, that he's All Might training Izuku. As Inko would look on in shock, just completely confused. The #1 hero, All Might, was training her son. She just couldn't believe it. So as all of this was happening, Izuku would finally show his class that he had received a quirk, saying that he was just simply a late bloomer, as Bakugo and the rest of the class would look on in complete shock. More of Bakugo being shocked That is, though, as everything he had done, all of the bullying because Izuku was quirkless, was all for nothing. Izuku wasn't quirkless. He just hadn't gotten his quirk yet. It hadn't awakened. As Bakugo would fall back in his chair holding his head, just not sure what his life work and his actions had led him down to, he would end up just wondering how, as without someone to bully being Izuku, not having a quirk anymore, not having a reason to bully Izuku, he would end up bullying his classmates, just forcing everyone away from him, as the very few people that would still stay with him were just scared that he would just push them away and end up attacking them and bullying them like he did with the other students. So as Izuku would become more and more popular, Bakugo would become less and less popular. And so as the final day of school would end up coming, everyone knew Izuku, who had basically become sort of like a Chad of the class. Basically, everyone knew he was going to make it into UA. His quirk was insanely powerful. They just thought it was some sort of lightning quirk, and everyone talked about how cool it was. So we end up skipping to see Ko and All Might just hanging out even more and more. With all of them just talking and hanging out, I would end up seeing them actually end up hooking up and being together, as All Might had been basically alone his entire life, and now Inko coming into his life from Izuku, she was basically very nice to him, and so they basically just started be together. And I see them actually end up marrying each other after a little while, starting to date around when Izuku was 13, and so they would be dating 2 years, and once Izuku would graduate, they would probably end up marrying each other. So as Izuku would be stretching, waiting to walk down to the UA entrance exams, All Might would give Izuku a good luck before Izuku would walk off, as he would end up making it there looking on at the big, just shining arches of UA. Walking into the auditorium, he would end up sitting down, as they would then explain everything that would end up happening. As Izuku would be sitting there, he would end up stretching before the doors would open, where All Might had told him that you never wait to be told go for being a hero. So Izuku would rush off, instantly destroying many robots as lightning would surround Izuku's body, as Izuku would continue to smash all of the robots nearby, only leaving parts of the robots, as Izuku would end up just getting a combined total of over 300 points, as Izuku would end up hearing a cry for help. It was near the end of the entrance exam, as he would look on to see a massive zero-pointer heading his way, as there was a young girl stuck in some rubble below the robot right in its path, as Izuku would rush off, sprinting off towards her, as he would then use his legs, jumping off right into where the robot's head was, winding his arm back before exploding his arm forward, shattering the robot's head just complete, fighting it. As parts would rain down, Izuku would land, grabbing the girl before jumping off, getting her out of the rubble, running away before any of the parts falling down could hit them. As Izuku would then end up walking away, hearing that the entrance exam had finished, the person who saved him farewell, as she would try to ask what Izuku's name was, but he was already long gone. As Izuku would end up sitting there waiting 2 weeks, he would end up getting a letter saying that he had made it into UA. Of course, All Might had told Nezu that he had found a successor long before all of this, and he would actually end up becoming a teacher as well, so there was basically no other option besides putting Izuku into one of the hero classes, being that the Class 1A hero teacher being All Might was basically his successor, just should be in his hero class. It would make no sense that he wouldn't be. So as all of this would end up happening, as the first day of UA would end up starting, Izuku would walk into class, as Aizawa would walk in, explaining what they were going to be doing. Izuku would, of course, would end up being thrown the ball first, having gotten the most points, as he would wind his fist back, exploding his quirk off, launching the ball into the just near distance, as he would explode off an impressive distance of around 1,500 meters, as everyone would look on in shock, as many of them would explode yelling how they wanted to do it. Aizawa would, of course, give his famous line that he would just expel one of the students if it was so exciting. They need to get serious. They're going to be risking their lives every day as a hero, and if they're not serious now, they're not going to be serious then. As many of the class would look on in shock. the just training would end up going as expected, like in canon. However, Izuku would end up getting first, Bakugo in around third or fourth, Momo in second, and Todoroki would be somewhere behind them. So as the next thing would end up getting, Izuku would walk into class as he would hear that the hero tests, or the just first hero class, was going to begin. And of course, All Might would end up rushing into the room like always, yelling at that, "Hello class, it is I, All Might, your hero teacher for this year," as many of the class would look on in shock. I see Izuku being paired up with Uraraka just like in canon against Bakugo and Ida. However, Izuku with the much stronger quirk now, he would easily be able to defeat Bakugo, who still would end up possibly training even more now that he had some fierce competition in Izuku. He wouldn't be on the same caliber as Izuku. This is Izuku being trained by the number one hero, All Might, after all. Of course, Izuku is going to be insanely strong. So Izuku would end up being on the hero's team, and so when Bakugo would turn the corner trying to explode Izuku, Izuku would dodge, grabbing Uraraka, so they would then jump on to one of the walls, as Izuku would then let go of her, propelling himself with his feet off the wall, punching Bakugo square in the face, just trying to put as much force behind this punch to get Bakugo as weak as possible with one punch. And Bakugo would be sent flying into a wall as his back would hit it, as a massive crunch would be heard. As Bakugo would lay limp there, Izuku would go in and would end up tying the limp Bakugo around with some just capture tape that All Might had given the heroes along with the villains. As Bakugo would wake up, he would start to struggle, but it was no use as he was captured. Both Uraraka and Izuku would walk into the massive room where the device was located. However, it wasn't that massive, so Ida's quirk couldn't really be too much of use in such small, tight spaces. So Izuku would form a distraction, and Uraraka, like always, would end up touching the device, giving them the victory. As all of this was end up happening, they would end up going on to a class field trip, this of course being the USJ. Now, meanwhile, Izuku would be loving all of Bakugo failing. He had grown to have a hatred towards Bakugo. Izuku loved everyone around him, and everyone loved him back. He was such a friendly and happy person that it just bounced and reflected off of everyone, causing everyone's moods to be brightened every time they saw him. However, with Bakugo, Izuku's entire demeanor and just emotions would completely change. Izuku never forgave Bakugo for all the bullying that he did to others, including himself. And so Izuku would end up telling All Might about all of this when All Might was training him, but All Might would shrug, saying that there's nothing they could do unless they caught Bakugo doing something like this. And so Izuku, with this hatred towards Bakugo, would continue on training harder and harder to just be better than Bakugo in any way, knowing that Bakugo, who still saw him as useless, would be outmatched by someone useless, making him even more useless than that. So as the USJ events would end up transpiring, All Might would end up jumping in to save the day like always. Now, I see the USJ event going pretty much the same. However, Izuku would end up helping Asui to get off of the shipwreck, as Izuku would actually end up helping All Might defeat the Nomu, as All Might would be quite much weaker, having given his quirk to Izuku long before this, so the embers of One for All would be almost gone very diminishingly. So as All Might would use up his embers fighting the Nomu with Izuku, All Might would then puff into smoke as he was gone. Not dead, but his quirk had completely left him, and Izuku had now been the sole One for All user. All Might had used the last embers of One for All to save his class, defeating the Nomu with the help of Izuku. As the police would arrive rushing in, helping many of the students out, many of the students would see All Might standing there, as they would then be transferred back to the classroom, where All Might would be sitting in front, as Nezu would end up walking in. "Well, it's a shocking sight to say, isn't it?" Nezu would say, as All Might would then sort of just laugh. Well, I guess I might as well tell you the story. I actually got injured a while back, right up around here, fighting one of the history's greatest villains. I wasn't able to defeat him, but I seriously injured him just like he seriously injured me. And so my quirk is completely vanished from my body now, as I can no longer use it because of this injury. Sure, it's still there, All Might would say, just trying to make everyone know that the number one hero isn't quirkless or something, just trying to make them not worry that their quirks can be destroyed by an injury. My quirk, of course, is still here, but I just can't use it because of how bad this injury really was, All Might would say, as the class would look on just in shock, as many of them would give encouraging words towards their hero teacher, All Might. He still had one of the best experiences as a hero, and he could surely help them, quirk or no quirk, in their journeys to becoming a great hero. As all of this would be transpiring, Nezu would end up telling them that the sports festival is just around the corner and they should start to be prepared. As we skip forward to the start of the sports festival, Izuku, of course, would end up easily winning the race, having used his quirk to easily sprint past everything, dodging the zero-pointers, knowing that it'd be a complete waste of time. And even if he didn't dodge the zero-pointers, he could have just jumped up and punched them with one single punch, as Izuku was basically a one-punch man in the making, as All Might basically was a one-punch man to most normal people. However, since One For All got stronger and stronger and stronger, with Izuku now, he could possibly one-punch anything, including All For One. That's just the capability of One For All's sheer power. So, as all of this would end up happening, Izuku would end up going on to the second round, the cavalry battle. Now, with his 10 million points, Izuku would end up having an idea. Now, All Might had put Izuku through tireless amounts of training, and with these 5 years, Izuku unlocked many of the One For All quirks. He managed to get Black Whip, he got Float, and so with these two quirks, Izuku would easily be able to decimate the population below him. So as the cavalry battle would begin, Izuku would jump up into the air, floating up there, using Black Whip to grab other people's headbands, as Izuku would cause mass panic below, as everyone would scramble to try to find a way to get Izuku. Now, the second place Bakugo, who got second place in the race and had the second biggest headband, would grab down onto the people's shoulders below him before exploding off, burning away the shoulder parts of the people's uniforms, causing the sleeves to fall off as he would jump up towards Izuku, about to explode him. However, Izuku's hand would go in a flicking motion, flicking off, causing Bakugo to be sent flying down, as Izuku would get first in this event as well. Now, the 1v1 event would go basically the same. Izuku would get first, as many people had saw the sheer power that Izuku had held. And so Izuku would actually get brainwashed, much like he had in canon. Still being a naive child, pretty much, Izuku would speak, telling Shinso that he shouldn't speak badly about his classmates, as Izuku would end up being sent back into the dream world, where he would end up seeing the past users of One For All. However, he was used to this, having dreams like this all the time. He had gotten Black Whip and Float after all. So as Izuku would end up having this, they would cause Izuku to flick, having a jolt of energy through Izuku, causing him to wake up right as he was about to step, where Izuku would turn around, easily defeating Shinso, use his One For All, as his fingers were completely fine. And so Izuku would continue on destroying the competition, including Todoroki, as Todoroki without his flames would be completely useless. Izuku would still be the certain kind of person that he is in the anime. So I see Todoroki getting his flame power, knowing that it isn't Endeavor's, and it never was. So with the added combination of Todoroki now using his fire, it was a bit more difficult for Izuku. However, the fight would go pretty much very quickly. Izuku would storm up to Todoroki, who really wasn't a close-range fighter, and was rather a far-range fighter that could just spew attacks going either which way that would end up hitting his opponent, causing mass damage. But with Izuku close to him, Izuku could just punch him, rocking him, causing him to just fall backwards out of the arena, giving Izuku the victory. Of course, Todoroki would put up more of a fight, however, just with the combined total of how powerful Izuku's quirks would end up being, Todoroki just couldn't end up winning this fight, as Izuku would power his way to the finals, versing Bakugo, as he would crack his knuckles, smiling that this was the fight he had been waiting for all of this time. Stretching his body, he would then grip the floor with his feet as if getting into a sprinting position, as Midnight and the entire crowd would look on anxiously as she would then give the word to begin, as Izuku would launch off towards Bakugo and Bakugo would do the same, exploding off towards Izuku, exploding as he would lift his hand back, slamming it into each other as if going for a Kamehameha wave like Goku would. As Bakugo would slam his hands down, trying to hit Izuku's back, Izuku had put one of his fingers on the ground, completely changing his direction, as it was a style of fighting that Gran Torino had taught him over the vast years of training that he had received from him. As Izuku would continue on doing this, gripping down on the floor, keeping low down to the floor, which is a style Izuku would call animal style. He would just jump around at insanely high speeds very close to the ground, causing him to easily change his direction insanely fast, as Bakugo would easily get frustrated, slamming his foot down onto the ground, exploding off towards Izuku, yelling for him to stop being such a baby and come out and fight him, as Izuku would jump up right in front of Bakugo before smiling, as he would punch Bakugo square in the face in between both of his nose and his eyes. Okay then, as Izuku would put both of his hands back before slamming them down into Bakugo's face, as Izuku would lift up his hand once again, as Bakugo would try to jump up. However, Izuku would use Black Whip, grabbing Bakugo, squeezing him before slamming him down into the ground. As Black Whip would start to get out of control, Izuku would be forced to injure himself to try to keep it at bay, as Black Whip is fiercely tied to emotions, and with Izuku getting his emotions out of hand and out of check, Black Whip had started to grow restless. So Izuku would flick himself, injuring him as if telling Black Whip to go back and stop being just annoying. So Black Whip would end up retracting as Izuku would look towards the unconscious Bakugo as the crowd would cheer. Izuku had just won the sports festival, and he looked like he was going to be a rival to the Big Three. He had easily plowed his way through the competition, and everyone who had just seen the third-year sports festival knew that Izuku had a chance to possibly rival someone like Mirio. So I see Izuku taking the internship with Gran Torino again, wanting to get even more training from him, as Gran Torino had years of experience in the hero world and still had his license, so he could still save people and be basically a hero. Sure, he wasn't ranked anymore, not having the capability of doing that, being he was an old man, but he still had all of the knowledge from back in its days being a real hero. So Izuku would go in for knowledge, as Izuku would end up being told Gran Torino would have a ton more confidence with Izuku, giving Izuku a temporary hero and quirk usage license, as they would end up still being on the bus, where they would end up being separated. Gran Torino would tell him just to do anything he can to save as many people as possible. Izuku would end up fighting Stain just like in canon, as he would end up saving many of the people in the train, getting them out of the way, as he would end up rushing off looking for Gran Torino, as he would end up remembering something Ida said about the hero killer. This would cause Izuku to search the alleyways up and down until he had found him, as the hero killer would end up staring on before looking down at Ida and Native. "Oh, it appears one of your hero friends has arrived. You're to take revenge like these two unworthy people." As this fight would go much like canon, except Izuku wouldn't call for Todoroki's help, as Izuku, now with a much bigger power boost, wouldn't need that help one bit, easily being able to defeat Stain while also shoving his ideals right down Stain's throat, as Stain would of course end up thinking how Izuku, just like All Might, was worthy of being one of the only heroes that actually had good ideals and weren't just in it for all the money and fame. So as Stain would end up being taken away, Izuku would actually see the Nomu coming in trying to grab Stain. However, he would jump in the way, punching the Nomu, causing it to be sent flying backwards. So as everyone would end up going into class, Nezu would end up telling them that the final exams were supposed to be set to happen. And now Izuku, of course, would easily be able to pass these final exams, as he's not going to be versing against All Might this time, as All Might, of course, having been retired from hero work and not being able to use his power, he wouldn't be able to verse them. So as what teacher Izuku would most likely verse, I see it actually being Nezu, as Nezu would go twice, facing off against two teams. So with them versing Nezu really didn't stand much of a chance. He just wanted to see the capabilities of Bakugo and Izuku in action, both of them having some of the strongest quirks he had ever seen. As Bakugo would of course rush off away from Izuku, Izuku would take a more analytical and strategy type approach to the fight, knowing it was going to be insanely hard to take down someone with the intellect and knowledge that Nezu had. However, Bakugo would just go in, guns blazing, and launching himself towards Nezu, trying to defeat his robot, where of course Nezu's robot would just grab Bakugo and squeeze him tightly, as Nezu would just laugh. "You should have stayed with your teammate. Hero work is much like teamwork after all. You should probably get a lesson from this. You can't always fight a villain one-on-one, Bakugo." As Izuku would come in having to save the day, beating Nezu's robot after a tough but close fight. It wasn't that close, but Izuku was still able to. But Izuku had basically been able to beat it, as Nezu would end up saying, "Well, since Izuku was the only one that pretty much did anything, Bakugo, you get summer school, just like with the rest of the failures," Nezu would say, sort of laughing, as many of the people who had failed would sort of shrug their shoulders like, "Man, why did we have to fail like this?" As many of them would give excuses like, "Oh, maybe it was because they got just easier teachers and all of this." Now, with the summer training camp arc, it would go much of the same. However, with the news of All Might's retirement, they no longer cared about All Might. Sure, Shigaraki still wanted to kill that smiling hero. However, now their eyes were fully set on UA. So, with their eyes set on UA, the attack was going to be much stronger. Now, the fight with Muscular would go a bit easier and quicker. Muscular I don't see being any bit stronger, so Izuku would easily be able to take care of Muscular with ease. However, Izuku would jump around, helping Aizawa and the rest of the heroes take down many of the other students. And with Bakugo just about to be kidnapped, Izuku wouldn't have any injured arms. Having had the experience of fighting, he wouldn't injure his arms. They might be a little sore from all of the fighting with Muscular and everyone else. His arms wouldn't be injured. So he would jump in, grabbing Bakugo right back, pulling him out of the portal, as then the villains would be gone back in their hideout. As Shigaraki would slamming his foot down onto the ground and just pain. They had gone in trying to get someone to kidnap and use as ransom or try to turn Bakugo into a villain. However, Izuku had saved him, as they just couldn't. Sorry about that, guys. Had to pause the recording real quick. So, anyway, Izuku would end up just being seen as Bakugo would end up breathing heavily, having seen the other side, seeing the villain hideout with all of the villains staring at him, as Izuku would grab them by the foot, pulling him backwards, as Bakugo would end up finally gaining a respect for Izuku. Izuku didn't have to save him, but here he was saving him anyway, and so Bakugo would have a newfound respect for Izuku. So, as all of this was happening, the villains would just be comprehending what would end up happening. And this is where they would end up meeting the overhaul group and all of that, trying to get stronger as Shigaraki, having it just now not having to worry about Bakugo, would go in trying to merge with overhaul, trying to become an even stronger league of villains. And of course, the all-for-one fight would end up being postponed as well. Now, everything ends up going just smoothly as the League of Villains would be planning an even bigger attack, setting their sights for the graduation day for the class that they had been attacking. As Shigaraki knew, the class had already defeated them twice before, and one of the kids in it even defeated Stain. So if they were going to defeat this class, they had to prepare for it. And so Shigaraki would set his sights far, knowing their preparations were going to be quite long, gaining an entire army of people to help them. So as this would be happening smoothly, Izuku and his class would pass through UA, as Izuku would get top marks in the quirk assessment test, getting his quirk license. Izuku would name himself Deku, after all of the stuff that Bakugo had done, and just trying to he couldn't think of a name and would end up just choosing Deku after all. It kind of sounded cool, but still it had strong reminders of what happened to it. But Izuku could care less. Bakugo was now much friendlier and wasn't acting the way he'd done, even apologizing to Izuku for all of the stuff that he had done. So with that, the fight with the big three would end up happening, as Izuku would actually rival Mirio. Mirio would, of course, challenge them. However, Izuku would actually put back a strong fight, as Mirio would go in, going for a punch to Izuku's stomach, over Izuku would block it before landing a hit across Mirio's face. As this fight would end up going on, where I see it then and ending with Mirio winning. He still had much more experience just in hero training. Sure, Izuku had been training for all that time with All Might of them, but Mirio had gotten more professional training from UA staff and all of that. Sure, All Might was a professional hero, but he wasn't a professional teacher, and so he wasn't the greatest at teaching Izuku new techniques. Plus, Mirio had gained lots more techniques about how to incapacitate someone a lot easier, knock them out conscious a lot easier. So Mirio would end up putting up a close fight with Izuku. However, Izuku would end up losing down, as Mirio would end up breathing heavily, saying that Izuku had actually given him quite the strong fight, and he wishes to fight him again one day once Izuku is in class, or in the third year class. So as all of this would end up being happening, Class 1A, or now Class 2A, and now Class 3A, would easily pass up through the ranks as graduation day would end up happening. The fight with Overhaul would happen as Izuku would still just go into this mode to save Eri, as he would end up just going and saving Eri much like he had done in canon. I don't see the fight going any different besides it being a tad bit quicker because of the power Izuku had. And when Izuku graduates UA, I see him having One For All almost fully mastered. He had grown quite a lot and was now quite a bit stronger. And so with One For All nearly mastered at around 80 or 90% of it unlocked, Izuku would know he was ready to become the #1 hero and take that title from Endeavor. So as all this would end up being happening, the graduation day would finally happen, as the big villain attack would happen as well, as the UA school building would actually nothing would end up happening to it. As all of the students would be leaving the UA grounds, something would happen, as UA was securely just protected. However, once they left, the attacks would go all loose, as the villains couldn't find a way to break through the security, having been upgraded so many times over the years. And so when all of the students decided to step out of UA for one last time, finally the attacks would end up happening. As portals would go around all throughout the city surrounding the massive UA campus, villains would spew out along with a massive army of Nomus, as the brainless creatures would launch themselves towards Izuku and his friends. However, with Izuku being this much stronger, these Nomus would be patchwork form. They were easy, as Izuku would easily one-punch all of these Nomus, as they were nothing compared to the USJ Nomu, as they weren't focused on power, not focused on quality, but much rather quantity, as Shigaraki knew something. It doesn't matter about how strong something is if you have enough of it, as enough weak things could overpower one strong thing. So if he got a massive army of Nomus, and they weren't very strong, they would possibly overpower Izuku after a little while. However, if they spent all their time getting a couple strong Nomus, they wouldn't really overwhelm Izuku, and Izuku would still most likely be able to beat them. As the news would end up just being told about all of these great hero recruits coming out of UA, as Shigaraki would end up hearing about it. How Izuku was the top-ranked hero coming out of UA, being said that he was most likely going to become the number one hero one day, and so he set his plans to defeat Izuku first. However, all of these plans would end up failing, as the Nomus would be easily decimated by the new patch of heroes that had just graduated, as Nezu would actually end up making a Class 1C for heroes, having more people end up coming in. However, that Class 1C could be for people that are a bit older, and so that Class 1C would basically be like Shinso and some older people that just didn't get the chance to be heroes. It wasn't certainly the best class to be in, like Class 1A or like a Hero A class, but it certainly was a hero class, and they certainly were strong. So with the added help, they would easily be able to take care of the army of Nomus. And this is where I see the final battle between One For All and All For One happening. With Izuku basically almost in his prime, All For One would stand no chance. With the added medical help, he would get a tad bit better, but he was still insanely injured, and he just couldn't fight or keep up with Izuku. And so with Izuku easily be able to take him out, he would finally unlock 100% of One For All, and using Float and Black Whip, he would take out All For One, as All For One, who would put up a good fight, just couldn't last. As with one last punch, Izuku would decimate All For One's body, as it would be nowhere to be seen, completely just disappearing, gone forever. It was just destroyed. As Izuku would travel up the ranks, passing through, as Izuku would finally become the number one hero, making his mother and now father All Might proud, as he had gotten married after Izuku had graduated. And as Izuku would be smiling down on the top of the hero world, he would think back to when he was just a small child and had asked All Might the question if he could be a hero one day, even though he was quirkless, as Izuku planned to keep on One For All, just passing it on down throughout it was. And so in many years from then, Izuku would be around 50, where he would then find his next successor, deciding to train them to become the next just hero and vision of hope that the public needed, as Izuku would retire, giving One For All to his new successor. And that is where this what if ends. Izuku becomes the number one hero after receiving One For All. And that's what would happen to the events if Izuku had gotten One For All early. Those are the events I would see end up playing out in my eyes. It was kind of a slower pace to what if Deku took Bakugo's advice was, but it's still in the same sort of style. It went quite fast, but it wasn't as slow as some of my other what ifs, and it wasn't as fast as what if Deku took Bakugo's advice. I hope you all did enjoy watching this video. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.